The biggest mistake people make with Claude Code isn't bad prompts, it's no setup. You wouldn't hand a new employee a laptop with zero context about your business and expect great work on day one. But that's exactly what 99% of people do with Claude Code. They install it, type a prompt, get an okay result, and wonder why it feels inconsistent. 7 steps fix that. Step 1 alone changed the quality of everything Claude produces for me. And step 3 is completely counterintuitive. It's a technique that deliberately slows Claude down, and somehow that makes the results dramatically better. Stay for step 7 because that's where Claude stops being a tool and starts being something else entirely. Most of what I'm about to show you comes directly from Boris Cherny, the person who created Claude Code at Anthropic, and a handful of power users whose setups have gone viral. This is not a feature tool. This is what the people who built the tool actually do with it. By the end, you'll have a setup more capable than 99% of people paying for Claude, even if you've never written a line of code in your life. Step 1, give Claude its instruction manual. This is the single most important thing you'll do in this entire setup, and it takes about 10 minutes. There's a Claude.md file. Think of it as a brief you would hand a new hire on their first day. Here's who I am, here's how I like things done, here's what not to do. Claude reads this file at the start of every session, every time, no exceptions. So whatever is in it shapes everything Claude does for you. Now, Boris Cherny, the person who wrote Claude Code, keeps the one for his own team absurdly short. The key is that every line is specific, not vague. A fluffy line like write good code means nothing to Claude. A real rule it can follow does. Here's what mine actually looks like. At the top, a tone rule. Be concise. Sacrifice grammar for the sake of being concise. Then a section called plans. Never start building until I say go. And at the end of every plan, give me any questions you need answered. 1 line each, keep them blunt. That's it. Short, specific, grouped into sections so it stays readable as it grows. The filter for every line would be, would Claude get something wrong without it? If yes, it goes in. If not, leave it out. Now, if you're not technical, there's one section that matters more for you than anyone else, and it's about how Claude Code communicates with you. By default, Claude talks to engineers. It throws terms at you, shows you code, assumes you know what things mean. You need to tell it not to. So your Claude.md should open with who you are and how to talk to you. Something like, I'm a non-technical founder. I build by describing what I want in plain English. Explain everything as you go in plain language. Never use a technical term without telling me what it means. If you hit a decision I should weigh in on, explain the options simply and let me choose. When you finish, tell me in plain English what you did and what I should check. That single block changes everything. It's the difference between Claude talking over your head all day and Claude actually being usable by someone who can't read code. Write it once and Claude reads it every session at the start forever. Now here's the most important habit in this whole video, and the best part is it means you barely have to write these rules yourself. This comes directly from Boris himself. Every time Claude does something you don't like, every time it makes a wrong choice or ignores a preference, you tell it to remember the correction. And there's a dead simple way to do this built right in. You type the hash symbol, the pound sign, and then write what you want it to remember. Claude takes that and writes the rule into your Claude markdown file for you automatically. So when Claude does something you don't want, you just hit hash and say, always ask before deleting anything. And it's now a permanent rule. Boris says Claude is eerily good at turning its own mistakes into precise rules. And here's the thing. When you do this for a few weeks, something remarkable happens. Your Claude Markdown becomes a curated list of every gotcha, every preference, every edge case your project has. Not rules you guessed up front. rules earned from real mistakes. Every correction makes your every future session better, the same way compound interest builds on itself. And it adds up fast. After 2 weeks of doing this, the same prompt that gave you a mediocre result on day one gives you something dramatically better. Step 2, make Claude think before it builds. This is the step that separates people who get mediocre results from people who get exceptional ones. And the simplest version costs you nothing. Before you ask Claude to build you anything, just tell it, before you write any code, make a plan and run it by me first. That's it. You don't need any special feature. Claude understands the instruction and will lay it out its thinking before it touches anything. But there's a stronger version for when you really want to lock it down. It's called plan mode. You turn it on with a command /plan, and while it's active, Claude physically cannot create or change a single file. All it can do is read your project and think. So the casual way is asking nicely. Plan mode is the more enforced way, where building is simply switched off until you approve. Why does this matter so much? Because the biggest mistake everyone makes with AI coding tools is jumping straight into building. You type, build me a booking app, and Claude starts creating files immediately. If it makes a wrong assumption early on, every step after that compounds the error. 20 minutes later, you've got a broken project and no idea where it went wrong. Plan mode prevents that completely. Claude reads your project, thinks about the structure and says, here's what I'm going to build, here's the files I'll create, here's how they connect, here's my reasoning. You read it, push back on anything that doesn't match what you had in your mind, you shape the plan together with Claude. Then you tell it to go. Now it builds against a plan you've already reviewed and approved. You don't need to understand the code to understand a plan. When Claude says, I'm going to create a page for users to log in, and a page to see their dashboard, and a page to manage their settings, you can evaluate that. You know that if it matches what you want. Whichever method you use, asking for a plan or enforcing it with /plan, do it every single time you start something new. Step 3 makes Claude interrogate you before it builds. Plan mode forces Claude to think. This step forces it to make you think, and it's the single change that did the most for me. Let me give you a real example. A few weeks ago, I wanted to build a tool that analyzes my competitors' YouTube channels. Which of their videos are outperforming, what topics are working, how often they post, that kind of thing. Normally, I'd just describe that to Claude and let it build. Instead, I ran a skill called Grill Me with Docs. Matt Peacock created it and it exploded in popularity. Over 100,000 people have bookmarked it on GitHub, which is the platform where developers share tools and code. When you run it, Claude doesn't start building. It starts asking you questions, hard questions. For my tool, it asks things like, how do you define outperforming? Is it views or views relative to the channel's average? What counts as a competitor? How far back should it look? What happens when a channel deletes a video? I hadn't thought about half of these. The session ran about 45 minutes and Claude asked me something like 40 questions before it wrote a single line of code. By the end, I had a rich, detailed conversation full of decisions I didn't even know I needed to make, and Claude had built up a glossary of my project-specific language. Then when it finally built the thing, it built it against all of that context. The result was in a completely different league to what I would have gotten from a single line prompt. To get it, you paste one line into Claude Code. NPX skills, latest add Matt Peacock skills. Don't worry about what that means, it's just the install command. Then you type grill with docs and it works. This is the exact opposite of what most people expect from an AI coding tool. They expect speed, but the friction is the feature. And here's why that makes sense. Writing code was never the hard part of building products. Ask any software engineer. The bottleneck was always understanding the business problem, figuring out what to build, who it's for, where the edge cases are, What happens when things go wrong? The specification, the thinking. That's where projects succeed or fail, and it always has been. All Gorilla with Docs does is force that thinking to happen before a single line gets written. The 45 minutes you spend being grilled saves you days of fixing something that was built on the wrong assumptions. There's also a simpler version called Grill Me if you want the questions without the glossary. Step 4. Give Claude specialist abilities. Think of base Claude Code as a smart generalist. It can do a lot of things reasonably well. Skills turn it into a specialist. A skill is a packaged set of instructions for a specific type of task. There are skills for building websites, checking that things work properly, finding and fixing problems, generating documentation, analyzing data, reviewing code quality. You install them, and when Claude encounters a matching task, it automatically loads the right skill and follows specialist instructions. When it doesn't need a skill, it doesn't load it. So it's not cluttering up Claude's attention when it's irrelevant. You've actually already met one of these skills. Grill with docs from the last step is a skill. So you've seen how much one can actually change the output. Here are a few more worth knowing about. The first one is called TDD. That stands for test-driven development. But what it means in practice is this. Before Claude builds a feature, it first writes a check that will prove the feature works. Then it builds the feature. Then it runs the check. If the check fails, it fixes the code until it passes. So every single thing Claude builds comes with a built-in way to verify it actually works. Now, why does this matter so much? Because without those checks, you have no way of knowing if something Claude built actually works until you use it yourself and something breaks. And worse, when Claude builds the next feature on top of that one, it might accidentally break the first one without either of you noticing. Automated checks prevent this. They're like a checklist that runs instantly every time anything changes, catching problems the moment they appear instead of 3 weeks later when a customer finds them. That's why professional software engineering teams treat testing as a non-negotiable. And TDD breaks that discipline into Claude Code automatically. There's /diagnose, which forces a disciplined approach to finding and fixing problems. Reproduce the issue, narrow it down, form a theory about what's wrong, fix it, and then prove it won't happen again. And there's PRD. PRD stands for Product Requirements Document. If that sounds corporate, think of it as a structured brief that lays out exactly what you're building, who it's for, what every feature does, and what success looks like. The kind of document that means everyone involved, including Claude, knows exactly what the goal is with zero ambiguity. What 2PRD does is take the rich conversation you just had during the grilling and turn it into one of those briefs automatically. You can chain these together, get grilled, turn the result into a requirements brief, break that into individual tasks, then build each task with built-in checks. That's an entire production workflow from a handful of skills. Anthropic also has official skills too. Code review looks at the code Claude's just changed and audits it for actual bugs, things that would break or behave unexpectedly, as well as opportunities to make it cleaner and simpler. It runs multiple reviewers in parallel, checking from different angles, and tells you how confident it is about each finding. Simplify is different. It's not looking for bugs, it looks at what Claude recently changed and asks, is there a simpler way to do this? Can any of the code be reused? Can anything be removed? It's a quality pass, not a correctness pass. And there's a plugin that acts like a real-time spell checker for code, catching errors automatically after every change Claude makes. The Claude Code team calls this the single highest impact plugin you can install. And here's a trick that goes a step further. Some of the most effective people don't just have Claude review its own work, they bring in a completely different model to do it. You take the changes that Claude made and have something like ChatGPT's Codex look over them. A different model has different blind spots, so it can often catch things that Claude misses, exactly like getting a second engineer to review your work instead of marking your own homework. If something really matters, a second opinion from another model is probably one of the best quality checks that you've got. But here's what matters most for people watching this video. The skills you need might not be coding skills. You can write your own skill that knows how to structure a business proposal in your preferred format. A skill that follows your exact processes for writing social media content. A skill that generates client deliverables with your brand voice. Creating one is dead simple. You make a folder, write a text file describing what the skill does and when to use it. And it's available in every session with Claude. Boris's rule, if you find yourself giving Claude the same instructions twice, that's probably a skill waiting to be created. Step 5. Connect Claude to your actual tools. Without connections, Claude Code can only work with files on your computer. That's useful, but it's limited. Step 5 is where you open the doors. Claude Code can connect to external tools and services through something called MCP servers. In practice, this means you connect it to your database, your Notion workspace, Slack, your project management tool, your design files, your analytics. Each connection gives Claude another real capability it didn't have before. Setting these up varies by tool, but the pattern is generally always the same. You tell Claude Code where the connection lives, usually by pasting a short line of setup text, and it handles the rest. Many connections are a single command. The practical result is what matters. Say you're building an app that needs to store data. You connect Claude to a database service like Supabase, which is basically a place where your app keeps its information. Now, instead of you figuring out how to structure that data, you just say create a table for users with name, email, and sign-up date. Claude talks to Supabase, sets it up, and your app can immediately work with real data. You just configured a database without ever opening a database tool. One important tip from a practitioner guide that struck with me: resist the urge to connect everything at once. Every connection gives Claude more tools to think about, and if there are too many, the decision-making quality actually drops. Start with the 2 or 3 tools you actually use the most and add from there. Boris says he hasn't had to manually look up or manage data in a database himself in 6 months because Claude handles it through a connection. But he keeps his connection list focused. Step 6. Stop doing one thing at a time. Up until now, you've been using Claude Code like a single assistant doing one task. This step is where it becomes a team. Boris says the single biggest productivity unlock the entire Claude Code team agrees on is running multiple Claude sessions at the same time. Boris himself runs dozens at once. You don't need to go that far. Start with 3 or 4, each working on a different piece of your project simultaneously. When I was building the competitor analysis tool, I had one session building the part that pulls the channel data, another designing the dashboard, and a third writing the checks to make sure the numbers were right, all at the same time. They each work in their own separate copy of the project, so they can't step on each other's work. Type /agents and you get a full dashboard showing every running session on one screen. What's actively working, what needs your attention, what's finished. You can peek at progress without interrupting. You can jump into one, answer a question, and jump back out. It replaces the old way of flipping between tabs, trying to remember which one was doing what. You can also create what are essentially specialist workers. Think of them as different roles on your team. You define a code reviewer that checks work against your quality standards, a researcher that reads documentation and reports back, a debugger that traces problems to their source. Each one operates with a fresh brain, so the research one can read 50 documents without cluttering up the brain of the one that's actually building your feature. The pattern that I'd learn first is writer-reviewer pattern. One session builds, then a completely separate session reviews the work with fresh eyes. It catches things the first one can't because it has no attachment to the decisions that were made. It's like having a colleague who wasn't in the room for the brainstorm read your work cold. Step 7. Let Claude work while you don't. Everything up to this point requires you to be watching. This is where you walk away and come back to finish work. And this is the part that fundamentally changes what this tool is. So before I show you, if any of this has been useful so far, please take 1 second and subscribe. I cover Claude Code and the whole AI builder stack here regularly, and I'd hate for you to miss out what's next. Right, step 7. There's a feature called /goal. You set a condition, something concrete like the app loads without any errors and every automated check passes. Claude keeps working until the condition is verifiably true. Every time it thinks about stopping, it checks. Not done yet, keeps going. It's like telling an assistant, don't come back to me until this is actually finished and you've checked it yourself. There's also loop, which reruns Claude on a set interval for up to a week at a time. Boris runs one every 5 minutes that babysits his active work, automatically handling code review, comments, and keeping things up to date. He runs another every 30 minutes that puts his work up for feedback. There's /schedule, which sets up what Anthropic calls routines. These run in the cloud on Anthropic servers, so they keep going even when your computer is completely off. Think morning triage, a nightly summary, a daily report, anything you want to happen on a regular schedule, whether you're at your desk or not. Boris's actual daily workflow pulls all of this together. He turns on a mode where Claude handles routine decisions automatically instead of asking for permission for every small action. He turns on a focus mode where he only sees the final result, not every intermediate step. He writes a clear brief with what he wants, what the constraints are, and how he'll know it's done. Sets a goal, walks away, comes back to finished work. And while that session was running, he had 4 others going in parallel on different tasks. From his phone, he can check any of them through the Claude mobile app without being at his computer. And the thing that ties the entire system together, Boris's #1 tip, the thing he repeats more than anything else, give Claude a way to verify its own work. His favorite example is this. Give Claude a picture of the design you want, a mock-up of a web page, and tell it to build that page. On the first try, it probably gets pretty good. But if you also give it a way to see its own result, so it can take a screenshot of what it built and compare it to your mock, then let it go again, it iterates 2 or 3 times on its own and gets the result from pretty good to almost perfect. That's the whole principle. Whatever you're building, give Claude a way to check itself, whether that's looking at a screenshot, running an automated check, or testing against real data. Without that, you're the only quality check. With it, Claude keeps going on its own until the thing actually works and won't hand it to you until it does. 7 steps. Give Claude an instruction manual that gets smarter every time it makes a mistake. Use plan mode so it thinks before it builds. Run grill with docs skill so it interrogates you and services the decisions that actually matter. Install specialist skills so Claude stops being a generalist and starts being an expert. Connect it to the tools you already have so it can work with real data. Run multiple sessions at once so you're not doing one thing at a time, and set goals, loops, and schedules so Claude Code works when you're not even there. Most people stop at step 1. They install Claude Code, type a prompt, get a decent result, and that's their entire experience. They never give it an instruction manual, they never use plan mode, they never install a skill. And they keep getting generic, inconsistent results from a tool that's capable of dramatically more. The difference between this is a fun toy and this is genuinely changed how I worked. It's not the prompts, it's the setup. It's those 7 steps. Each one compounds on the last. And you just learned all of them. So here's the thing to take away. The people shipping real products with AI right now, the ones who make it look effortless, they aren't smarter than you, and most of them can't code either. They just set their tools up properly. That's the whole difference. And now you've done it too. Drop a comment and tell me which one of these 7 steps you're setting up first. I read every single one. Now, I threw a few Claude Code terms in you in this video, things like MCP and skills and plan mode. If any of those still feel a bit fuzzy, I made an entire video breaking down every Claude Code concept in plain English, built specifically for people who aren't developers. It's the perfect next watch to make everything we just covered click. It's right here. Go have a look and I'll see you over there.